Americans for Safe Access is celebrating our 23rd anniversary. For over 2 decades, we've brought medical cannabis stakeholders together to meet the immediate needs of patients while addressing knowledge, policy, and regulatory gaps, clearing the way for a national medical cannabis framework that serves all patients. What you may not know is that ASA has been women-led ever since I founded the organization in 2002. For our 23rd anniversary, I've created this series where I've interviewed women who have taught me everything I know about medical cannabis. My goal is to share the inspiration that these women have brought to my life with new and seasoned advocates alike. I'm honored to present the women who crush, the women who get shit done. My next guest, Dr. Leigh Vinocur, is a physician, a cannabis expert, an author, and all-around badass. I'm so excited that we caught some time with her that I can share with you. Hi, Leigh. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Steph? Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this project, something positive to create. And I know you're super busy, so I appreciate you finding some time to come hang out in this little space I've created.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, well, let's just jump in and I'm going to ask you the question I've been starting all these off with, which is, how did you find your way into cannabis world?
Well, it was funny. I probably had been out of residency and practicing for 25 years. I was at University of Maryland, and I was talking to a colleague in the School of Medicine, and he said to me that his paper was just accepted on the endocannabinoid levels in stressed rats. And I was like, what? Wait a minute. What word did you use? And he goes, endocannabinoid. I go, you mean like endorphins? We have internal cannabinoids? He's like, yes. I'm like, why? And he was a PhD. I said, why did I not hear about this in medical school? And he said, I didn't learn about it in graduate school either. Well, not to date myself, but I had already graduated from medical school during the discovery period of the late 80s and early 90s. So that was one reason. But I really wasn't hearing a lot about it. And I was just fascinated. I started reading everything I could find. I was just floored that animals as primitive as sea squirts actually have cannabinoid receptors. So it's so ingrained in our DNA as a survival mechanism to help with stress and things like that, and how our body maintains homeostasis. So I was just completely shocked. And because I'd been practicing ER for years. Cannabis was a gateway drug. It was so terrible. It was addictive. It made you stupid.
Right.
So I started looking into it, reading on my own. I did have a friend and colleague, Dr. Dan Morheim, who actually brought medical cannabis, and this was even years later after that, to Maryland. And because I had done so much reading, I helped some people with the medical parts of their applications once it was cleared medically in Maryland. And then when the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy offered one of the first master's degrees in the country, I just jumped at it and I took it. And I had started my practice early when Maryland first allowed medical cannabis. So I had already had a little bit of a practice when I was doing it. I know you said I had met Bonnie and you had interviewed her, and I
Yeah.
asked her for a recommendation to the school, and she's like, "Really? Why do you need this?" And I said, "Honey, I'm a lot older than you, and to become an expert, I don't have 15 years now, so I'm going to get a master's degree, become more of an expert, and do my practice." So that's how I came about doing it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think so many people I've interviewed have said, like, I never thought I would be talking about cannabis. I never thought it would be a part of my life. So it's definitely shown up as a surprise in many people's life, including my own. But one of the things I have to say is so exciting about medical cannabis now is that when I first started ASA, like I was so alone. Like there was nobody, working in this space. We couldn't get doctors to even mention it. If they did help me out with like writing something, they didn't put their name on it. So I just love that there's so many people working on solving the problem of how to get this to patients. And
Yeah,
so,
and there are more programs cropping up. Like I teach a summer program at Morehouse College. I teach a class on medical cannabis science and therapeutics. So there are some more places doing it, but still medical schools. I mean, I think there was a study now, it's probably 5 or 6 years old, from the American Association of Medical Colleges that said only 11% of colleges were talking about cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. It's probably increased some, but whereas 60% of graduating doctors were saying they weren't prepared to handle it because they don't really get that much training in it. But I think it's getting a little bit better. And over the course of since 2016, when I opened my practice, I mean, I think there's been a change. I've given lots of grand rounds around the state of Maryland, and doctors are more open to it. Even if they don't want to recommend themselves, they understand it a little more. But, big universities, there aren't any private practice doctors hardly anymore. So people that are on staff at big universities and medical schools, everybody was always worried about their funding. Which is kind of a joke today too, because funding is being taken away anyway,
yeah.
irrespective of cannabis. But um, yeah, that's been part of the issue. So they would prefer to have somebody else recommend. And my practice is tiny. I mostly get referrals from doctors, and most of my patients are pretty ill or end of life type things. So
Yeah. No, it's I think the fact that we that doctors don't have nutrition as a part of pre-medical and
yeah,
medical
great.
is a major reason why it's really hard. I mean, I've worked on several projects trying to get the education introduced in pre-med and medical school, and if you don't understand nutrition, it's pretty hard to understand the endocannabinoid system.
It
Uh,
is true. And I've done so many other things too. So I work in the nutraceutical space, which does have a lot of overlap. I actually started that after cannabis, and I see a lot of the issues because I was on your webinar where we talked about contamination and safe
right,
products, and that's an issue with nutraceutical products too. So, the United States, everything was an herbal medicine back in the day, right? Willow bark, foxglove. When pharma came in, it was easier, much easier to make synthetics. But there was also that precise, it wasn't just making the synthetics and getting, regularity and standardization. There was also precise dosing that came
right.
with it. And with nutraceuticals, there isn't precise dosing. The same thing with cannabis. And sometimes it's even hard for patients because there's no one pill that fits all, right? So,
Yeah, I think that's definitely how the Western medicine approach. It's almost like like your healthcare isn't yours, right? You give it to your doctor and you just do whatever they tell you to do. And I think part
mhm.
of what I've heard from a lot of people is that, medical cannabis has been like the gateway to understanding their body, to understanding how to be a patient advocate in all realms of their relationships with healthcare. And so it's definitely been, I mean, everybody's, when they talk about cannabis, they talk about a journey, right? And I think that's it definitely for everyone. Has they've ended up in a point where they didn't think they were going to begin. But I think, part of the sort of growing up of medical cannabis, so to speak, or having more people involved has really been having people like yourself, right, who had other experiences with healthcare, with medicine, and if I understand, you have a way that people can learn a little bit more about some of the work you've done coming up pretty soon.
Well, I did, besides the cannabis practice, I have a consulting practice and I've created programs, but everybody's got programs for learning, but I have done training in the industry. I've done training with patients. I spend a lot of time explaining it because it is harder for patients to understand that personalized medicine. So I know that that's true. And it's been a journey for me too, as a physician dealing with medical cannabis. But, as a physician too, I've had this whole journey, and I have a book that's coming out
Okay.
in June, and it's called Never Let Them See You Sweat: How Science Can Help Us Harness Stress for Success. And it really is like part memoir, part self-help book, and part women's health book. And it is geared towards women, to empower women to manage their stress, and to also how to give themselves some credit, and how to not be afraid to try new things and fail. Because my whole journey and medical cannabis and getting my master's degree and starting this practice
Right.
has been a part of it. I mean, I also just recently, with my partner, started because I did a urology residency almost completely before emergency medicine. So I just started a men's health integrative health practice about metabolic health and hormone replacement and everything. So, my whole life and my whole attitude is I consider myself a lifelong learner, sort of like a shark. I have to keep moving,
Right.
or I die. So I'm always kind of trying new things. I'm not practicing in the ER anymore. I tell people that was a young person's sport. It's really gets to you after a while. But I
Right.
had this integrative cannabis practice. That was part of my journey. And it's in the book that talks about it, and also the endocannabinoid system, and how I was so surprised that I didn't know anything about it, and how I learned about it. And then other facets of my life where I've tried other things, and it's really, I'm hoping this book will inspire women to not be afraid to try other things and give themselves credit. I have seen so many incredible women that just don't give themselves credit. They get stuck in situations. Look, as an ER doctor, I took care of many women in domestic violence situations, and it is hard to get yourself out of there because those are the most dangerous times, right? But it's a lot of it. And how do they get in that situation? It's the loss of their self-esteem that gets chipped away by an abuser. And so it's so important as a woman, and I think too, other women lifting up other women. That's why I love this idea that you're doing this, and you're
Thank
actually a woman who crushes it too. So,
thank
um, but I believe in lifting up other women, and I believe, I have had so many wonderful friends at different stages of my life, and I actually dedicated the book to it. And probably the most important relationship that I've ever had in my life is with my mother, who passed away many years ago now, in 2006, but at a very young age, but she was my best friend, my mentor. She pushed me to try other things and not be afraid of failing. And I have had epic failures, I have to tell you. And I was hoping to use a lot of the wisdom that I learned from her, my journey, and to hopefully inspire women and give them the support to try the things that they want to do. So,
I
that's
can't wait to read it. I
yeah,
love
it's coming
that.
out June 12th. I will
Okay.
send you a copy, and
Okay.
but it is meant to inspire women. And medical cannabis was part of my journey that I talked about, as well as cannabis for treatment of anxiety and stress. And but it's all the other things that I've done in my life, and what's important, and how to manage your stress, and how to, because you know what, people would come up to me and they would say, if I was at a lecturing or something, it seems like I have it all together. No, I am a neurotic perfectionist. I have just as many insecurities as anyone else, and there's nobody that has it all. So I want people to know I'm human. I make mistakes. I've had epic failures at things. And, I just give it a try if there's something that you want, that you're passionate about, or that you want to try. And I think that's the important message, especially now with this assault on women that I'm seeing everywhere.
Yeah. I think, I was talking to one of my previous guests about, I like creating space for women, not necessarily to talk about being women, but to talk
Right.
about what it is we're doing. Because so often when we're in spaces that we've been granted by men, that they just want us to talk about being a woman, when in fact, like, yes, being a woman is part of who I am, but we're also all of these other things.
Right.
But I think also, part of the challenge for women to try new things or to even get out of situations, you said, goes back to how we're raised as women. I was my grandfather's favorite grandson, as he liked to say. And this is going to sound so simple, but I would go with him to when he worked on tractors, when he worked on vehicles, and he taught me how an engine worked.
Yeah. That's
And
amazing.
like just that, the fact that that I was able to see how something worked, that's how I've approached everything, right? If you know how something works, you know how to diagnose it and how to fix it. And I just think about how many women are not, like, they're pulled aside and asked about, do you have a boyfriend? When you're like in kindergarten, you're like, why would I have a boyfriend? Right? Like, not asking what is your
Right.
favorite subject? What is the thing you want? And so I think just some of those simple skills make it harder and make it more important that we reach out and give other women space.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And, I always tell people that my mother was the smartest woman I ever know. She was one of those kids that was reading a book she loved inside of a school book in the 1940s, or
Right,
they would call my grandmother and say, Lynn's walking across the street reading a book. She's going to get hit by a car, or skip school and go to the attic and read. She read so much. She was so smart. She knew everything, but nobody had any expectations for her. And when she scored the highest test score in the whole school, in high school for college entrance, people were like floored. And then, of course, after 2 years of college, she met an older doctor and her family pushed her to marry. And she had me at 19. So she never did. I always said there was so much more she could have done. And she's like, well, I'm happy that you and your brother, I can push you and your brother. And she did. And
yeah.
I thank her for that. And I just wanted to provide that to women because you're right. There's a lot of women that aren't lucky enough to have that opportunity or have somebody believe in them. And she really instilled in me that I could try and do whatever I wanted to do. And at least I would try it. And, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And I have the same, failure rate, imposter syndrome. As I was writing the book, I'm having imposter syndrome. I'm like,
Right,
why is anybody going to want to see this book? Or what do I have to say? But when I sent it out for reviews, I got some really good reviews. So it did make me feel a little better. But I have the same insecurities as
right,
anyone else. It's just learning how to manage your stress, harness it, push through that so that you can try something new. And do what you want to do. Look, I was the first woman accepted into the urology program in
wow,
Michigan in at my school at Wayne State because they had an amazing pediatric urology program. And then when I just wasn't happy doing it, my mentor who pushed me into that as a doctor that I did research with, I saw a child die on the table, and he was the top pediatric urologist in the whole country.
right,
His name was on the book, Campbell's Urology
right,
Behind
right,
Alan Perlmutter. He's since passed away. He was a Renaissance man. When I saw that could happen to him, I thought, I can't do this. And then there I was in urology and all the way through my fourth year. But then it took a lot of guts to say, and I felt like I was letting everyone down. I sort of did because I don't think they accepted a woman for another 10 years.
right,
But I mean, I still had to be true to myself and I had to leave. And ER worked out great for me and allowed me to do the other things that I was interested in. And throughout my career, I've been able to try other things like broadcasting and
right. I was
such
about to say, I
because
was about to say, yeah,
yeah,
you've done a little bit of
right.
everything. Yeah,
Because I always said, well, first I used to say I supported my broadcasting habit by working in the ER because there's not a lot of money in broadcasting. And
right,
then also but it was a way to enact health changes across a greater community, which I liked. You know, you can treat one patient at a time in the ER, and in the ER, it's kind of too late. You know, there's no preventive medicine, which is important to me. So it was a way to do it. But I had so many doors slammed in my face. I used to tell people it's harder to get on television than it was to get into medical school.
Wow. Wow.
Just
I
sort of.
think, yeah, one, another common theme through all these interviews is I find that when women learn how to do something, they very rarely keep it to themselves, right? It's like when a patient, finds success as of a treatment with cannabis, they want to go teach everybody else how to do it. And for, physicians that learn like, wow, this is working for my patients, the next thing you're doing is doing grand rounds and teaching other doctors like there's this other option here.
Right.
And so I'm so grateful of all these women in my life that I know are also teachers, and they're also all avid learners.
Right, it is. The thing I loved about medicine is lifelong learning. You're constantly reading journals, this and that. And, you know, when I was in medical school, less than a third of the class were women. And now, sometimes even more than half the class. But there's still that sticky floor, glass ceiling, because if you look at heads of department, you
Right.
know, it's still 10 or 11%, heads of corporate medicine. So, even though there are a lot more women physicians today. And you know, in my book, I even write about you want to live longer, you want to not return to the hospital with infections after surgery or readmissions, go to a woman doctor. We listen, we're communicators, and statistics bear me out. I mean, so this book, I give tips, but they're not tips off my head, you know, like, oh, I'm making this up. I mean, I have thousands and thousands of references in the book of studies that I've gone through about these. And there are studies like through Journal of American Medical Association that totally backs this up. There are less rehospitalizations. Women surgeons have less post-op infections, you know, women doctors. So, you know, we're a dedicated group. We listen. And you know, all of my doctors are women. I don't have any male doctors. So I really believe in the power of women in medicine. And hey, moms, I listen to moms. I used to listen to moms in the ER all the time. You know, if they told me they felt something was wrong, I would see sometimes male colleagues go, oh, I think she's just being a little crazy. No, I believe them. Same thing with themselves. If they say
Right.
something is not right with me, I believe you as a physician, and we communicate and we figure it out. So it's very important.
That's so interesting. I hadn't seen that study, but when I was working in Prague, I was introduced to this study that was happening in Europe, that was this experiment called the Listening Project. And basically, all it was having physicians listen to their patients for 2 minutes, for two minutes before they asked any questions. Just shut up and listen. And the diagnosis rate increased by like 42%. I mean, it was amazing, right? The doctor's like, oh no, I know what's wrong with you. And you're like, and so the example that someone gave me was like, someone coming in with extreme nausea and the doctor giving them all this medication. And then they came back because they had a concussion, actually. They were throwing up because they had like hit their head.
Right.
Nobody asked them about like, let them finish their sentence. So I
No,
never,
no, that is very true. It is so true without interrupting them. And it's hard, you know. I mean, I know in medicine today, a lot of times you're stretched in the ER and you're trying to, but there are a lot of studies that corroborate that about women physicians
I
too.
love that. Well, I can't wait to read the book.
Well, I'm excited. I will send you a copy. It's coming out June 12th.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for finding some time to spend with me. And are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, well, you know, I just want, you know, I think this is a great project. I think there are so many incredible women that I've met all throughout my life. And I just think that sometimes we are too hard on ourselves. And one of the basic tenets that I want women to get out of this book is to give themselves some grace, give themselves some space, accept mistakes that can happen, realize that nobody else is perfect, and to just push on and do, what they do and be themselves. Because I see so many women that are so hard on themselves, and there is no such thing as having it all. That is a social media phenomenon,
Right.
television phenomenon, the busy woman who does it all. No, there's no such thing as that. So you slip up, things happens to all of us. You just go on with it.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, Leigh.
Thanks, Steph. I appreciate you having me on.